thoughtful, reflective, Clement Vallandigham's fatal defense. On June 16, 1871, Clement Laird Vallandigham arrived at the Gibson House Hotel in Lebanon, Ohio, preparing for what would be the most important trial of his legal career. The 50-year-old attorney had built a formidable reputation as one of the most skilled and passionate defense lawyers in the state, known for his dramatic courtroom presentations and unwavering commitment to his clients. Vallandigham had traveled from his home in Dayton to take on the defense of Thomas McGeehan, a local man accused of murdering Thomas Myers during a barroom altercation. The case seemed straightforward to prosecutors, but Vallandigham believed he could prove his client's innocence through a compelling alternative theory. Vallandigham's career had been marked by controversy and dramatic turns that made him one of the most recognizable figures in Ohio legal circles. During the Civil War, he had served as a prominent peace Democrat, so vocally opposed to the Lincoln administration's war policies that he earned the nickname Copperhead from his detractors. His fiery speeches against the war had led to his arrest in 1863 by Union military authorities, followed by his dramatic banishment to the Confederacy. He had somehow managed to make his way from the South to Canada, then campaigned for Ohio governor while in exile, losing but securing an impressive number of votes despite his physical absence from the state. After the war ended, he returned to Ohio and rebuilt his law practice, channeling the same passionate intensity that had marked his political career into his legal work. The Thomas McGeehan case had attracted considerable attention throughout Warren County. On the evening of March 30, 1871, McGeehan and Myers had been drinking at Hamilton's Saloon in Lebanon when an argument erupted between them. Witnesses reported that the dispute had escalated quickly, with both men exchanging heated words before Myers suddenly clutched his abdomen and collapsed to the floor. A gun was found near Myers' body, and he died from a gunshot wound shortly after being carried from the saloon. The prosecution's theory was simple and seemingly airtight. McGeehan had shot Myers during their argument, then attempted to make it look like an accident or suicide by placing the gun near the victim's body. But Vallandigham had developed a different theory entirely. After interviewing witnesses and examining the physical evidence, he became convinced that Myers had accidentally shot himself. According to Vallandigham's reconstruction of events, Myers had been carrying a pistol in his pocket during the argument. As Myers reached for something or made a sudden movement, the gun had somehow discharged while still in his pocket, sending a bullet into his own abdomen at an upward angle. The trajectory of the wound and the position of the powder burns on Myers' clothing seemed to support this theory. If Vallandigham could demonstrate to the jury exactly how such an accidental self-inflicted shooting could have occurred, he believed he could create reasonable doubt and secure McGeehan's acquittal. The Gibson House Hotel served as the gathering place for attorneys, witnesses, and other parties involved in the trial. On the evening of June 16th, Vallandigham met with fellow defense attorney Thomas Milliken in their shared room to discuss strategy for the upcoming proceedings. The trial was set to begin the following day, and Vallandigham wanted to rehearse his dramatic demonstration of how Myers could have shot himself. He had obtained 2 pistols for this purpose. One was his own loaded weapon, which he typically carried for personal protection, and the other was an unloaded gun that closely resembled the weapon found at the scene of Myers' death. The room was modest but comfortable, furnished with typical hotel accommodations of the era: 2 beds, a washstand, a small table, and a few chairs. Evening light filtered through the windows as the 2 lawyers discussed the intricacies of the case. Vallandigham was animated and confident, convinced that his demonstration would be the key to winning the jury's sympathy and belief. He explained to Milliken exactly how he planned to show the jury that Myers could have inadvertently caused the gun to discharge while reaching into his pocket or making a sudden movement during the heated argument. The mechanics of the demonstration seemed straightforward in Vallandigham's mind. He would place the unloaded pistol in his pocket, then make the same type of movement that Myers might have made during the confrontation. By showing how easily the hammer could catch on pocket fabric or how the trigger could be inadvertently pulled during a hasty movement, he would prove that the shooting could have been entirely accidental. It was the kind of dramatic physical demonstration that juries found compelling, transforming abstract theories into concrete, visible proof that they could understand and believe. Vallandigham had placed both pistols on the dresser earlier in the evening. Both weapons were similar in appearance, muzzle-loading percussion cap pistols typical of the era, with distinctive shapes and mechanical actions that required careful handling. One pistol, his personal weapon, was fully loaded with powder, ball, and percussion cap, ready to fire if needed for self-defense. The other pistol, which he intended to use for the demonstration, was completely unloaded and safe to handle. The two guns lay side by side on the wooden surface of the dresser as the lawyers talked through their courtroom strategy. As the discussion continued, Vallandigham reached for what he believed was the unloaded demonstration pistol. His mind was focused entirely on the legal arguments and the dramatic presentation he would make to the jury. He had handled firearms countless times throughout his life, and the familiar weight and feel of the gun in his hand gave him no cause for concern. Standing in the hotel room with Milliken watching, he began to demonstrate the motion that Myers might have made, reaching towards his pocket area while explaining his theory of the case. "This is how Myers must have done it," Vallandigham said, moving the pistol towards the pocket area of his trousers. He was focused on the demonstration, thinking about how he would present this to the jury, how he would explain the angle and trajectory, how he would make them see that Myers' death had been a tragic accident rather than a murder committed by his client. In that moment, Vallandigham made a fatal error. He had picked up his own loaded pistol instead of the unloaded demonstration weapon. The two guns lying side by side on the dresser had been confused in his mind as he reached for what he thought was the safe, unloaded weapon. Now, as he positioned the gun near his pocket and continued his demonstration, the loaded pistol's hammer caught on something, or his finger inadvertently pulled the trigger, or the weapon discharged through some combination of movements that precisely mimicked the scenario he was trying to prove. The gun fired with a deafening explosion in the confined hotel room. The lead ball, propelled by the powder charge, entered Vallandigham's lower abdomen at an upward angle, exactly matching the trajectory he had been describing as the path of the bullet that killed Myers. The impact staggered him immediately, and he looked down in shock at the growing stains spreading across his clothing. For a brief, terrible moment, the irony of the situation must have registered. He had just proven his theory correct by accidentally shooting himself in precisely the manner he claimed Myers had been shot. "My God, I've shot myself!" Vallandigham exclaimed, his voice filled with shock and disbelief. Milliken rushed to his side as Vallandigham collapsed on one of the beds, clutching his abdomen. The other lawyer immediately called for help, his shouts bringing hotel staff and other guests rushing to the room. Within minutes, word spread throughout the Gibson house that the famous Clement Vallandigham had been shot, though the circumstances remained unclear in the initial chaos. Doctors were summoned immediately, and they arrived within a remarkably short time given the era's communication limitations. Upon examining the wound, they quickly determined that the situation was grave. The bullet had entered Vallandigham's abdomen at an upward angle and likely damaged internal organs and blood vessels. The bleeding was significant, and the risk of infection in an abdominal wound was virtually impossible to combat with the limited medical knowledge and capabilities of 1871. The doctors worked to stabilize him, applying pressure to slow the bleeding and administering what limited pain relief was available, but they held little hope for his recovery. As he lay on the hotel bed, drifting in and out of consciousness from shock and blood loss, Vallandigham reportedly remained lucid enough to understand what had happened. According to witnesses, he discussed the accident with those around him, even noting with grim satisfaction that he had inadvertently proven his theory correct. If he, an experienced handler of firearms, could accidentally discharge a pistol while demonstrating a simple movement, then surely Myers could have done the same during a heated argument in a saloon. The demonstration had worked exactly as planned, except that Vallandigham had used a loaded weapon instead of an unloaded one. Word of the shooting rapidly spread throughout Lebanon and the surrounding communities. By the next morning, crowds had gathered outside the Gibson house waiting for updates on Vallandingham's condition. Newspapers sent reporters to cover the story, recognizing that the potential death of such a prominent and controversial figure would be major news throughout Ohio and beyond. His family was notified and rushed to Lebanon, though the distance from Dayton meant they faced an agonizing journey knowing he might die before they arrived. Vallandigham lingered through the night and into the following day, June 17th. The doctors continued their efforts, but medical knowledge in 1871 offered little hope for someone with a severe abdominal gunshot wound. Internal bleeding continued, and the inevitable onset of infection from the penetrating wound would have been impossible to combat with the limited antibiotics and surgical techniques available at the time.
His condition gradually deteriorated as his body succumbed to the trauma and blood loss. At approximately 2 p.m. on June 17, 1871, less than 12 hours after accidentally shooting himself, Clement Laird Vallandigham died in the Gibson House hotel room. His death was officially attributed to the gunshot wound he had accidentally inflicted upon himself while preparing his legal defense. The prominent attorney, former congressman, and controversial political figure had met his end in the most unexpected and ironic way possible, proving his legal theory correct at the cost of his own life. The immediate aftermath of Vallandigham's death created both personal tragedy and unexpected legal consequences. His family mourned the loss of a husband and father whose passionate nature and dramatic flair had defined his entire career. The funeral in Dayton drew large crowds, reflecting both his prominence in Ohio politics and law and the sensational circumstances of his death. Newspapers across the country reported the story with a mixture of solemnity and barely concealed amazement at the darkly ironic nature of the accident. For Thomas McGahan, the man Vallandigham had been preparing to defend, the attorney's death had an unexpected and ultimately beneficial outcome. The story of how Vallandigham had accidentally shot himself while demonstrating the defense theory spread throughout Warren County and beyond. When the trial eventually proceeded with different counsel, the jury had already heard about the famous lawyer's fatal accident. The fact that an experienced man had accidentally shot himself in exactly the manner the defense claimed Myers had done created a powerful form of proof that no living lawyer could have replicated in the courtroom. The jury found Thomas McGahan not guilty of murder. Vallandigham's accidental death had, in the most tragic way possible, validated his defense theory and secured his client's acquittal. The lawyer had succeeded in his mission to prove reasonable doubt, though he paid the ultimate price for that success. Legal historians would later point to the case as one of the most bizarre instances of a lawyer literally dying to prove his case, cementing Vallandigham's legacy in a way he never could have anticipated. The investigation into Vallandigham's death confirmed what Milliken and others already knew. It had been a terrible accident resulting from the confusion of two similar pistols. There was no suggestion of foul play or suicide, only a tragic mistake made by a man so focused on his legal strategy that he failed to verify which weapon he had grabbed from the dresser. The coroner's inquest ruled the death accidental, and no criminal charges were filed against anyone. The incident was officially recorded as a case of accidental self-inflicted gunshot wound sustained during preparation of a legal defense. The legal community responded to Vallandigham's death with a mixture of shock, sadness, and reflection on the dangers of courtroom demonstrations involving weapons. Bar associations began discussing guidelines for the handling of firearms and other potentially dangerous exhibits in legal proceedings. While dramatic demonstrations had long been a part of effective legal advocacy, Vallandigham's death highlighted the need for proper safety protocols when physical evidence or recreations involved inherent risks. Vallandigham's legacy remained complex and controversial even after his death. His political career as a peace Democrat and Copperhead during the Civil War had made him a polarizing figure, despised by many Union supporters and admired by those who questioned the war's conduct and constitutional implications. His legal career had been marked by the same passionate intensity that characterized his political life, with a reputation for taking difficult cases and presenting them with dramatic flair. The manner of his death, while tragic, somehow seemed fitting for a man whose entire public life had been marked by dramatic gestures and unwavering commitment to his causes. The Vallandigham case became a staple of legal lore, told and retold in law schools and courtrooms for generations. It served as a cautionary tale about the dangers of courtroom demonstrations and the importance of safety protocols when handling weapons or other hazardous materials in legal settings. Law professors would use the story to illustrate the principle that proving a point was never worth risking life or safety, no matter how compelling the demonstration might be. The Gibson House hotel room where Vallandigham died became something of a morbid curiosity, with visitors occasionally requesting to see the location where the famous lawyer had accidentally shot himself. The hotel continued operating for many years, and the story remained part of Lebanon's local history. The dresser where the 2 pistols had been placed, the spot where Vallandigham had stood during his fatal demonstration, and the bed where he had died all became elements of a story that seemed almost too strange to be true. Modern analysis of the incident has focused on several factors that contributed to the tragic accident. The similarity of the 2 pistols, the lack of clear marking or separation between the loaded and unloaded weapons, Vallandigham's intense focus on his legal strategy rather than on basic firearm safety, and the late evening timing when fatigue might have impaired judgment all played roles in creating the conditions for the fatal mistake. Firearms experts have noted that percussion cap pistols of that era required deliberate action to fire, making the accidental discharge during a demonstration movement entirely plausible, but also entirely preventable with proper safety protocols. The incident also raised questions about the practice of using loaded weapons in any demonstrative capacity. Even experienced firearms handlers like Vallandigham could make fatal errors when distracted or focused on other matters. The legal profession gradually developed more rigorous standards for the handling of weapons in courtroom settings, requiring that all firearms used for demonstration purposes be rendered completely inoperable or replaced with inert replicas that could possibly not discharge. Clement Vallandigham's death stands as one of the most ironic tragedies in American legal history. A brilliant lawyer and passionate advocate met his end while preparing to defend a client, accidentally proving his own theory in the most final way possible. His sacrifice, unintended though it was, secured his client's freedom and demonstrated the validity of a defense argument in a manner no jury could dispute. The case remains a powerful reminder of the thin line between dramatic advocacy and dangerous demonstration, and the importance of safety protocols in all aspects of legal practice. The legacy of that fatal evening in the Gibson House hotel room extends beyond legal history into broader discussions of irony, fate, and the unpredictable nature of life. Vallandigham had survived the intense political battles of the Civil War era, exile from his home state, and countless controversies throughout his public career, only to die by his own hand while preparing